Welcome to Raise the Line with Osmosis from Elsevier, seeking solutions with leading experts on how to increase healthcare capacity so people can get the care they need during the pandemic and beyond.
Hi, I'm Shiv Gaglani. Today on Raise the Line, our focus on rare diseases and conditions continues by welcoming another inspiring parent who is managing to not only care for their child, but to also advocate for other patients and their loved ones. I'm happy to welcome Luke Rosen, the founder and board chair of KIF1A.org, which is working to rapidly discover treatment for KIF1A-associated neurological disorder, or CAND, a rare degenerative genetic disease which his daughter Susannah was diagnosed with in 2016. There is currently no cure or treatment for this condition. In his professional life, Luke has spent the past 5 years in patient and community engagement at Ovid Therapeutics, a biotech company focusing on rare neurological disorders. He's also had a career as a writer and actor, appearing in shows such as Orange is the New Black and The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. And before we get started, I'd like to thank Akiva Zablocki, who folks may remember was on the podcast a couple of months ago talking about hyper-IgM syndrome and his son Idan, for the introduction to Luke. So Luke, thanks for taking the time to be with us today.
No, thank you, Shiv. It's such a pleasure. And echoing a big thanks and shout out to Akiva, who is somebody who I love and is so close to my heart. Yeah.
Agreed. And that's one of the most gratifying parts about doing this focus on rare disorders or zebras is meeting parents and patients like yourself and Akiva, who all seem to know each other and have supported each other over the years.
Absolutely. I mean, we really take pages out of each other's books, or I certainly have for Akiva, and you know, his Idan and his whole family are, like I said, very close to our hearts. So thanks to Akiva for making this introduction.
Awesome. So we're definitely going to go into your and Susannah's story and KIF1A. But the first thing, I know our audience would be interested in hearing more about your background, like your professional background, and then also this whole acting and writing career. Can you tell us a bit about yourself first, and then we'll go into the other stuff?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Thanks for asking. For about 20 somewhat years, I was an actor and writer in New York on film, or in New York, and primarily on film and television. And I wrote some plays, and it was a really wonderful, people say it takes 10 years to really kind of establish yourself and make a good living as an actor, and to be constantly working. Well, it certainly did take that 10 years, but after that it was wonderful. And I met my wife, and we had our oldest son, Nat, who's just incredible. And Nat used to, come to set with me and hang out, and was very much part of my life as an actor. And Susannah was born. Susannah actually, and I'll send you the picture. Susannah came to work with me one day and was in this print ad with me for Xerox. And, I was holding her like a football, and, she was in my arms, and all of a sudden, they did the shot, and it was all over buses and magazines and, airport jumbo screens. So, she was a member of the union before she was 1 year old. So Susannah is in her own right a very wonderful actor. But I was acting was a big part of my life. And when Susannah was born in 2016, and she started we started noticing that something was happening and something was seriously wrong with her health. I was in the middle of writing a play called Over the Moon with Trains, and we were in the middle of our workshop productions, and we're about to open. We were here in New York, and we're about to open in England and the UK. I was traveling a lot. I'd be back and forth from California to New York and England sometimes. And when I knew it was time to take a time out from acting, and I spoke with my agent and said that I was going to, step back from a little bit. We weren't quite sure what was going on. They were going to continue this play without me, which would ordinarily have been fine. But the play had so much of Susannah and Nat and my family in it, because it kind of, transcended from what was happening in our real life into my work. So I kind of hold that one close to my heart, kept it in my pocket, and haven't showed anybody that one. But so that moment when I was kind of sitting and speaking with my wife, and we realized that we needed to do something to really help not just our kid, but kids who are out there with this disease, which at the time we didn't know any, right? There's maybe 12 or 14 that we could find, and mostly in literature when Susannah was diagnosed. So we set out to start a foundation and build a community and find more kids. And I realized that was a far more impactful endeavor than doing beer commercials around Super Bowl time. So that's when we made the decision to do that. And the luckiest thing that happened was the first few families we met were Kat Ashley, who's the president of the foundation, is just an incredible person and had nonprofit experience. And we were just very fortunate I always think that leaders should surround themselves with people who are better than them. So we were very fortunate to find people with skill sets that were helpful in really jump-starting the foundation and the preclinical work we were able to do. So that's how we started the foundation. Yeah.
That's fascinating. So we're definitely going to go into a couple of those threads here, but first, before we dive into it, how is she doing?
Susannah's 8 right now, and she'll be 9 in May. And so she's doing, she's okay. It's easy to say, that default answer, oh, everything's okay, but it's really not. She's lost a lot of her vision. She's got, hundreds of seizures at night, and she's having difficulty walking. So things are a little bit difficult at home, but thank goodness for science, because we really are on the brink of several things for lots of, hopefully the entire community. And we've been fortunate enough, Susannah's been fortunate enough to just have started an experimental treatment thanks to a really amazing organization called n-Lorem. I'm not sure if you've heard of the n-Lorem Foundation, but they're really just wonderful people who set out to, leave no kid behind, because it's such a rare condition that a lot of traditional pharmaceutical companies, there's no real market size. So this organization is working with our physicians to not just find a experimental treatment for one person, but hopefully to scale it for the entire community. So that's something that I'm excited about, both on a personal level and as a community leader too.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. There's some hope there, which is great. So for our audience that probably has not heard of CAND, KIF1A, the gene itself, can you give us an overview of the condition and kind of what happens, how common it is, et cetera?
Yeah, of course. So it's we have, like I said, the community really galvanized together, even though it was very small. So right now, 5 years later, we have approximately 400 families around the world that we've identified. And we've done that by, advocating for next generation genomic sequencing and the right genetic tests for the kids. Often the kids are misdiagnosed with cerebral palsy or other, severe diseases like Rett syndrome, or LGS is another disease. But so one of the things we've done is really gone out there and tried to make sure that the gene was recognized as a diagnosis, because it does have to be diagnosed with a molecular test, with a genetic test. You can't just kind of see a kid in the clinic and say, oh, that kid's got KIF1A. It's a very complex and heterogeneous disease. So it's caused by the disease itself is caused by a mutation in the KIF1A gene, which is a gene. If you think about it, it's a molecular motor protein that's vital for brain function. And it's a large gene. So our disease, as we find more people, is very heterogeneous. So there's not just one mutation, like some other diseases that you might know of, but there's multiple different mutations around, across the gene. And that heterogeneity isn't just in where the mutation is, but it causes different affect and different presentation and different severity and progression of disease for the individuals who have those different mutations on the gene. Yeah. So it, for some, unfortunately, it's very tragic and it's a lethal disease before the age of 5 in some of those mutations. Other mutations, like Susannah's are, progressive over time. And we see her, we do see the degeneration in her, with her disease. The disease really is characterized by, there's cerebral atrophy. So the brain is atrophic as time goes on. Optic nerve atrophy. So that's where the vision loss comes in. And spastic paraplegia, which is basically lower limb significant spasticity. So lots of our kids are in wheelchairs and use walkers, and as they get older, it worsens. And I'm sure I'm forgetting some of the constellation of medical complexities that come along with the disease. One of them is really hard. One of the most difficult parts is there's a significant hereditary neuropathy, we call it, which is a neuropathic pain. And so if you see the nerves are in the body are the parts that are degenerating, right? So there's a toxic protein that these mutations cause, and that it causes nerves in hands and feet to slowly die or rapidly die, depending on where your mutation is. And so that's very painful. Like, a lot of times, Susannah will wake up and say, "My hands are burning on the inside," in her own way. Some of the kids are nonverbal. Susannah, we're fortunate, has speech. You have to be well versed in speaking Susannah, like it's a different language, but we understand. So the hereditary neuropathy is something that we're dealing with now and hoping to address. And I know a lot of people in our community are too, that pain. So those are just a few of the mysteries and the medical complexities that people with CAND deal with daily.
Yeah, I mean, the heterogeneity makes it so difficult, not only because it's such a rare condition, but also the presentation then is so different. When hard to get one of the big challenges of all the rare disease communities is getting big enough numbers for clinical trials and
Right.
to understand it. So tell us about kif1a.org. I know you started telling us about the evolution of it, but what are some of the top priorities you have now, and what are you most proud that it's done?
That's a great question. And the first and foremost, the thing that I'm most proud of is that the organization has galvanized such a strong community, right? So everybody's very active in the community. There's not one family I know that doesn't play a significant role in what we do. Between just dialogue and support, all the way through our mission, which is to really drive science to a therapeutic for families. And so that's pretty incredible that everyone plays a real part. And, something else that I'm really proud of and thankful for is our collaboration at Columbia, which is a commonality that Akiva Zablocki and I have, is a connection to Columbia. But we being in New York, our family, ended up in Columbia. That's where our kids were born. That's where, if I broke my arm on a bike, I'd go to that ER. This is around the corner, right? So we landed in Dr. Wendy Chung's office, who's the chief of genetics at Columbia. So we just happened to be fortunate enough to be in a place where there was somebody who could interpret the results of the diagnosis, and also is a incredible researcher and physician. So when we started the foundation, it was quite obvious that to centralize all of our resources and all of the families around this preclinical program at Columbia was the right thing to do. So right now we have something called the Koala study, which is every good study needs a good acronym, right? So it's called KIF1A outcome measures, assessments, longitudinal, and endpoints. So koala. And what that is there's in rare disease, as there's one of the major problems is that the outcome measures and endpoints that regulators and other people use are really antiquated, right? I mean, they've been around for far longer than our disease has. So it's hard to find measures and tools to measure that are standardized, that are appropriate for our disease, and by that, I really mean that, Susannah can sometimes have hundreds of seizures at night. And if an endpoint is a 50% reduction in seizure. Well, that's great, but 2 fewer seizures would be huge for us, and, it's just 10 more steps would be great, not getting up and running a marathon and things like that. So the study aims to really fly. We fly all of the or travel all the families, both international and domestic, to our Center of Excellence at Columbia, and all of the families have clinic visit, answer certain survey questions, and go through assessments for the various domains that are relevant in our disease. So the hope there is that we'll have a real understanding of the disease, but also have a way to measure change and to understand what really matters for every family across the heterogeneous disease that we have.
That's a really exciting and hopefully a good model for diseases like CAND that have such heterogeneity. I mean, it reminds me of something John Crowley, who I'm sure you know, told me on the podcast as well about the endpoints, where talking about his daughter Megan and his other son who have Pompe disease, where truly the endpoint, quality of life improves significantly for these patients and their family members if you can just get, as you said, instead of 100 seizures at night, just 98, right? Just like things, and obviously getting to statistical significance is clearly important if we're going to be able to find and improve drugs or treatments for these conditions. However, the lived experience is really important for these families. So that's a really interesting study. I'm glad to hear.
Yeah, I think, small change is epic for rare disease families. Incremental change even means a lot. And I did listen to, John Crowley is somebody who's been a guide and a mentor for me since I was, first, Susannah was first diagnosed, and his daughter Megan is a great inspiration and leader for young girls like Susannah.
That's awesome. Yeah, he's great person, great family. And again, that's one reason we love covering this, because so many heroic and inspirational stories. And so going into kind of key priorities as well. So koala is a really interesting study to be aware of. I think there's also a mouse model and trying to get cell lines to test potential therapies. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. And that's another huge, we really try as a foundation. We have a wonderful, one of the best moves we made was with the help of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. We were able to resource a chief science officer, right? So I can barely get through what CAND is without, crying or rambling about some genomic, I was doing Chekhov in East Village theaters, not not at the lab learning science. So we were able to hire a chief science officer who was one of a handful of people in the world really researching and working on the disease, and that's Dominique. So one of the things that we and I learned this from also, and we can get there if you want, going into biotech and learning about biotech is, you have to work non-sequentially. Right. You can't waste time by crossing something off the list, then going to the next. We kind of try to take all these shots on goal at the same time. And so along with the koala study, we're also certainly working on finding the right animal models, but most importantly, getting cell lines from all the families, and so we work really, really closely. And so do our partners at Columbia work really, really closely with Kat Lutz and the people at the Jackson Laboratory, who are just also wonderful people. And the Jackson Laboratory is another nonprofit, but with incredible scientists who really work on that, is developing disease models, and not just mice, but isogenic cell lines and other things like that. So with the folks at Jax, we were able to identify a mouse model that mirrored the lower limb spasticity of the disease, which was really critical in making progress and understanding and being able to test therapeutics on that animal model. But we're not finding treatments, or aiming to find treatments for mice. So it was really important for all of our families to be educated, and that's another great thing about our foundation. And Dominique, who's our CSO, is the focus on scientific communications. And what you do, right, psychoms is huge. So we really did put together an initiative to make sure that all the families knew how important it was to give blood, because not just for analysis, but to create human-derived cell lines. And with the heterogeneity of our disease, we need not just one or two people to give blood to make cell lines, but we needed to really get as much or as many of our families to give those samples so we could make cell lines and be able to mirror the disease in a dish, as they say. But we would, we do it in a very innovative, I think, way, a very practical way, right? I think that innovation these days is often just being completely practical and sitting down and having coffee with somebody instead of developing an app, maybe. I don't know. But, so we have big conferences, family and scientific conferences. Our last one was in person. Our last in-person one was 2019. We've done virtual since then, but our incredible president, who I mentioned, Kat Ashley, she really drives those, and there's a great convergence of community and science. So at the conference, we had a lot of people presenting. We had a lot of community support events and activities, and we had a phlebotomist, taking blood from all the families. So it's constantly a community and support driven foundation with very much a scientific element to it. And I think without both of those, you can't get to a treatment fast enough. So hopefully we're on the right path, and we're doing lots of different things at the same time, from investigating genetic based therapies to screening small molecules to really digging in and understanding what matters most to our communities.
Totally. That makes perfect sense. And I'm glad, I like that analogy of doing things in parallel and taking multiple shots on goal. Plus, going back to the basics, and so much of this is the awareness and education that obviously we're built on, and trying to get families to know why they need to donate blood and make it super easy, reducing friction. So when they're at the conference, I was wondering if you were going to say maybe to get into the line for dinner, pizza or cookies or whatever, you'd have to donate blood to get there, which would be I think a perfectly reasonable thing to do. So
we thought of that. We actually thought of when you check in to get your badge, you have to have the phlebotomist will be the person who's giving out the badge.
Totally.
But we decided that education was a better route than forced blood draw. Yeah.
I'm also glad you mentioned Chan Zuckerberg. So we actually have Tanya Chimincelli coming on the podcast in a couple of weeks, and
she is Tanya has changed. And sorry to cut you off, but I just have to say she is very, very in many ways responsible for what success if where we are right now as an organization. Tanya is an incredible guide for us, and also is incredible at putting people together to drive things forward faster. So Tanya is one of our champions, and I'm forever thankful to Tanya. So I can't wait to hear that one. She's amazing.
Totally. Yeah. And she has a great team. We met Heidi Bjornson-Pannell, who herself has 2 children with a rare disease.
Yeah.
And then I was introduced to Tanya by David Feigenbaum, because both Tanya and I are on his Every Cure advisory group. So great people. I'm glad to hear that CZI has been backing KIF1A.org.
Yeah. And talk about, taking pages out of people's book is, David is also a friend of mine, and he, people say, and I think this is unique for rare disease where other diseases, people are, take great ownership of what they do. But, certainly KIF1A.org, and certainly the people that you just mentioned, when somebody asks how to do things, it's kind of like, here, look at our website, take it, insert gene here, take whatever we've done as a community and try to apply it to your disease if there's ever if there's ever a way to help. And that's the case with David and Tanya, is that, David obviously, has worked relentlessly to make things happen faster. And in so many ways, David is, as you know, so not just transparent, but sharing and loving it. Says, here, take it. This is the model that works. Use it, so we're forever grateful for community members and leaders like those.
Absolutely. And again, whenever stakeholders can
Mhm.
get you multiple stakeholders involved. I mean, obviously the parents, and then, the way you're speaking about KIF1A, if anybody tuned into this without knowing your background would think you're a researcher yourself, because you know so much about the condition. You've had to. And so I'm curious on this point, since our audience primarily comprises current and future healthcare professionals as well as researchers, what advice would you give them about, being helpful? Like, think about some of your best and maybe worst experiences with the healthcare system in regards to KIF1A, and how you as a rare disease family were dealt with. What's some advice you'd like to give our audience about that?
Yeah, what a question. I think that, advice really is to spend time, to sit down and to really spend time and to not have a fractured community, right? And so if there are many times where, there's a community or a foundation that ends up getting fractured for whatever reason, some element goes one way, the other goes the other way, and all of a sudden you have uh, the strength of one community turns into a bunch of small initiatives that aren't nearly as strong as one community who has done everything they can to galvanize together. But I think advice really is to sit down and listen, and that listening doesn't happen nearly enough. We're very fortunate to have physicians who listen and who observe and who love our kids and who are their extended family members, really, right? I mean, our physicians are constantly checking in and are very honest and saying, look, we don't know much about this condition. The only way we're going to learn about it is to listen and to learn what your routine is like. And so it's it takes a community to want to be able to share their stories, which is, tremendously difficult. It's really hard to write about it, to talk about it. It's just, it's exhausting and often excruciating to relive it. And I think that when healthcare providers, when, industry members, when people give the community a platform to tell their story, just like you're doing, and give the community a way to articulate things that the person looking in from the outside might not necessarily know or understand. Know that, and it gets back to those measures, right? Is that I want people to know that if there's some way to get my daughter 5 or 10 more steps, that maybe she'll be able to make it to the bathroom without, having to completely lose the routine of our day, that gets my son anxious and gets him late to school. And there's so many different elements, and siblings are remarkable, right? I mean, we talk about, people say, can you tell us about the seizures that Susannah has? Sure, I can tell you about, the seizures she has, and how my wife and I haven't slept in the same bed in years because one of us has to sleep with her. But the most, the thing that I can tell you when I think about when a clinician or anybody asks me about Susannah's seizures, I can tell you about the time when the one time where I wasn't sleeping with her, and Sally was out of the house, and Nat, Susannah's brother, said, let's have a slumber party. And so the kids, got into bed, and the three of us had this incredible, any parent would love that moment where the kids fall asleep watching a movie on your shoulders together. It was great. And long story short, I kind of snuck out of bed to get ready for the day. My wife wasn't there, who's really our anchor. But I decided to, get out of bed to start the day. And then we had a scream from our son, said, Dad, get in here. Something's going on with Susannah. And she had a seizure and vomited and was aspirating. And the reason that she didn't die because of one of these seizures that unfortunately a lot of our community members do succumb to was because her brother was there to save the day and to help, and I think that knowledge that siblings go through that is something that needs to be talked about when somebody says, tell us about your child's epilepsy. It's more than just a quick question. It's a huge effect on not just the whole family, but friends and everything. So I guess that's a way of saying that my advice would be to really ask questions, to really listen, to really spend the time, and to be open. I think those are the best scientists and physicians, are people who are constantly learning.
Certainly. I think that's great advice and really nuanced. That we've done several of these interviews and no one shared that particular item. And so that's a really good thing to consider. Like, no one is just a patient. They're obviously a person, and no one is just a person in a vacuum. They are a person in a family unit, in a community. And so being able to consider those other aspects that make them who they are is critical.
They're absolutely. So that's so well said. And I think there's, on the research and science end, I don't know if I could eliminate, there are a lot of words in our lexicon that I think are, way off. But when people say basic science, I'm like, hold on, there's nothing basic about what these scientists are doing for us, because without that initial understanding of the gene or of the disease, then there's nothing. So I think that, engaging every single level of scientist, researcher, and clinician is huge. I mean, as a foundation, everyone thinks about raising money and being able to resource things. Well, I think that if you create a clinical trial ready ecosystem, or create something where you can go to a company or to a person or a scientist or a lab or a group and say, we'll be your proof of concept, because we're so ready. We have a center of excellence that could be a clinical trial site right away. We can rapidly enroll. We can do all of these things that, new technology and clinical trials need. And so if we can go and say, we'll be your proof of concept, I think that that's currency that is just as important as, raising $1 million at a lemonade stand.
Totally. I mean, I agree. And the money is obviously what funds a lot of this and gets people like Dominic, the chief scientific officer, because they obviously have to have a living and you need people to do that. But there's so many other things I know that the community that we can all do to reduce the friction. From our part at Osmosis, largely what we're trying to do is motivate a lot of our current and future healthcare professionals to pay attention to these disorders and maybe dedicate their clinical careers to them, because they could be the, like that the head of genetics you mentioned at Columbia, that person who is a lifeline for many patients and families like yourself. One of the reasons we're excited about joining Elsevier is that they bring all the research experience. So we have over 2,500 journals at Elsevier, and even our CEO, Kumsal, directly connected me with two patients. You may know them, Brett Copeland and Philippe Pachter, parents, family members, and have published research, not only from researchers, but patient perspectives. And that's something Tanya and I have spoken about, as maybe a journal of rare disorders, or being able to open access like Elsevier's done so many of the rare disease articles. And that actually is a long intro to a question I have for you, is what more could we be doing as Osmosis or Elsevier, or just the research/clinical community for KIF1A specifically, and then also the rare disease community in general that you'd like to share?
Yeah, and that's a hugely important question, right? I think and Tanya is really is somebody who's got a skill set to tap into when it comes to policy and to really driving policy. And I think that every bit of science needs to be promptly shared in an appropriate way, right? Intellectual property needs to exist to share things appropriately, not to monopolize things, right? And so I think that in giving access to everyone, has the right to learn about their disease, and everybody has the right to learn about therapeutics that are in development for their disease. So, when there are these, I have this kind of personal policy that I never speak at a conference that doesn't allow patients or caregivers or advocates in for free, right? I mean, a lot of these conferences cost thousands of dollars to be in, right? And it's creating citizen scientists and enabling families to take part in the process and integrate that into the process. This is the only way we're going to get there faster, right? And CZI has this wonderful, I don't love it, and it's kind of become a mantra of ours too, because of CZI is science is better together, right? Well, it really is. And so I think that your point about having patients be and caregivers and be co-authoring papers is really important, right? Is you have to have that that convergence of science and experience. And so many of us are, so many parents are, scientifically savvy and can inform elements of disease that, don't show up in your traditional peer-reviewed journals, right? But on the other hand, I think when people in the scientific community do come to a meeting, or do come to an event, or do come to a place where they're talking about rare disease, they need to do their homework. And that homework is, yes, learning and reading, your diligence, right? You go and you have all of the major publications from every big journal, from neurology to the New England, to the New England Journal, Medical Journal, and you've read them all because they're these pillars and these incredible publications that come from well-funded studies. But you know what? There are blog posts, there are platforms, there are stories that patients and families have written. My friend Mike Porath started a platform called The Mighty, and it's something that gives people an opportunity to write and share stories. And those stories are just as important as the peer-reviewed journals. And I think that when the scientific community really digs in, and your homework isn't just to read the latest peer-reviewed journal, but also to read Time too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a combination of that type of those data sets. I think that ultimately will help us better understand, especially heterogeneous diseases, and then find those cures and therapies for them.
And also is to enable families to measure things at home in a way that's going to be accurate, right? And is going to be helpful, right? 2 years ago, we started collecting in a very organized way Susannah's, seizures and her falls, right? And those are two endpoints that have now become very important in our endeavor for therapeutics. So, the scientific community teaching and educating, we've been really lucky to have people like Tanya, like Wendy Chung, like, myriad people like educate us and enable us to create the tools that are really needed, right? So we can go to regulators and say, look, here's a very, not just validated, but standardized diary and collection of events that might be able to help move things forward. So just the, educators or people with really wonderful skill sets, when they share their skill sets and educate families and patients, it's so critical. I can't tell you, I say this a lot, so forgive me for repeating myself, but when Susannah was first diagnosed, and I did this, as everyone does, a huge, dive into publications and trying to read things that are way above my head. And, if somebody had just told me that the word variant and mutation meant the same thing, it would have saved me hours and hours and hours. And I think it's that, education that people are, we're fortunate enough to have people give to us. But I think that, if you have a big scientific skill set or policy skill set, that obligation or that passion to share it with people who might not is something that, we'll be forever thankful for. And it's great.
That's a very helpful, specific example. And again, something we strive to do at Osmosis is reduce jargon, so that the same video we make on a rare disease, and my hope is this coming year we'll make one on CAND, is something that a patient will understand, a family member will understand, a researcher will get benefit from, a clinician. So, bringing everyone to the same sort of shared vocabulary while not losing the nuance or the actual science around it would be important.
Yeah. When I listen to your work and when I see what you guys have done, it's right in the wheelhouse of what needs to happen. And it's making the science colloquial, right?
Thank you. No, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you.
I know I've already taken you 15 minutes over what I promised in the schedule. And so I did want to kind of end by asking, what other things do you want to share with our audience with that we haven't gotten to yet?
Yeah, it's just a passion and the commitment. It's the question, and the thing that is really the litmus test is whether or not you can maintain things and whether or not things have a lasting ability. So we're 5 years into our foundation, and we're going to learn a lot about ourselves if we can be 10 years into our foundation, right? And similarly in biotech, if somebody's got a preclinical program, if that preclinical program is around until it becomes a clinical program and a therapeutic, I think that, being able to last and being able to maintain a strong community of people who are dedicated. I mean, we have people in our community who, have lost kids and who don't, their children have died tragically and, live on in science because they've donated their brain and their spine. And those parents are still critical members of our community and active members of our community. And there's nothing more evident about a community that's going to be lasting than if you have those tragic circumstances, but people are still community leaders. And I think that, every stakeholder can do everything they can to enable a community to last and to just be around and to be relevant for however long, whether or not you have a therapeutic or whether or not you don't. If there's a community of anybody, if it's patients, physicians, caregivers, anybody, if there's any community that could last and weather the storm but come out together still, I think that's huge. So anybody who can enable a community to last and the test of time is a really valuable stakeholder to all of our communities. So it's lasting. It's just showing up.
That's awesome. I agree. That's really great advice to end on, and hopefully something other patient organizations can emulate, like KIF1A has done a great job with. So Luke, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today, sharing your and Susannah and your family's stories. It's really heartwarming, and we're hoping for the best outcome for her and your family specifically, and then obviously your commitment to the overall community.
Wow, thank you, Shiv, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to be here and for elevating our whole community. It means a lot to us, so thank you.
Absolutely. And with that, thank you to our audience for listening to today's show. I'm Shiv Gaglani, and remember to do your part to raise the line and strengthen our collective healthcare system. We're all in this together. Take care.
If you like this podcast, please share it on your social channels. You can also subscribe to the series and check out all of our episodes at osmosis.org/raisethelinepodcast.